Chapter 12 to 16 Deception. I wore a black suit, a tie, and gelled back my hair. It was the traditional hairstyle referred to as a pomade. The suit and pomade was the perfect combination. Humans felt the need for a presentable appearance. I drove my car to an underground parking lot near the appointed place. I drove the car with a great deal of expertise. Of course, I had a driver's license. I only had it for 3 days. My field of concentration and memory was superior to humans. Once I became accustomed to driving the car, it wasn't that hard. After driving for 20 minutes, I arrived at Suyu Station. Once I took exit 3, there was the 2-story Way Cafe where the appointment would take place. There was no place to park, so I headed for a nearby paid parking lot. I drew a lot of attention the moment I walked into the cafe. Celebrity? Look, really cool. I naturally heard the conversation. My neat appearance also drew a good impression from the humans. My judgment wasn't wrong. My appearance wasn't lacking. I experienced similar things several times in the demon world. I only thought about getting stronger, but it seemed like the demon world had similar standards regarding beauty. Indeed, being a handsome man in the demon world wasn't that helpful. They could live comfortably if they caught the eye of a strong female demon. However, that would eventually end. Once abandoned, they would never be seen again. Every last one of them was miserable. Conversely, a beautiful woman was the strongest weapon itself. Some nobles highly valued the beautiful women in their harem. If they became sick, then compensation would be given. This was all unrelated to me. It was just idle thoughts. I pulled out my phone and called a number. There were a few rings before the other person picked up. "Hello?" A male voice. I asked carefully. "Where is it?" "Who?" "Randolph. Right now, I am on the first floor of the cafe." "Ah, Randolph Nim. Come up to the second floor." I immediately climbed up the stairs. A man was waving his hand on the second floor. There were a few people gathered around his table. 7 of them. It seemed like I was the latest. The man put out his hand for a handshake and said, "Nice to meet you. I am the leader, Yoonhyuk-soo." I used Mind's Eye to check Yoonhyuk-soo's status window. Name, Yoonhyuk-soo, occupation hero, garter. Title, none. Stats, strength 31, intelligence 25, agility 28, stamina 33, magic power 27, potential 144, 231. Uniqueness, none. Skill, smash N, track N. There wasn't any specific potential. Tracking skills were a bit unusual, but it wasn't a big deal when considering the nature of the garter. I shook his hand and replied, "Randolph Brigzeal." "Oh, are you perhaps a returnee?" My skin was too bright compared to South Koreans. It was natural to think that I was a returnee. He was also determining the ranks. "That's right." Somehow that tone, "Anyway, you are very handsome." "Is that why the women's faces are turning red?" Yoonhyuk-soo slyly said as he turned his head. There were 3 women in the group. I turned towards them while avoiding their eyes. "Pleased to meet you. Now, just sit down." I sat down on the empty seat. The atmosphere around the male members was a little uncomfortable. They were dressed in different clothes while I was the only one wearing a suit. "Is it okay to enter the dungeon wearing a suit?" One of the male crew members ended up saying. His eyes were glaring at me like I was the enemy. There was jealousy in that gaze. I could understand the situation immediately. They were only looking at the female members of the crew, the pretty women wearing makeup. It wasn't much, but they were decent beauties. This jealousy wasn't worth dealing with. The air became tense before Captain Yoonhyuk-soo laughed and said, "Haha, aren't we also going to change clothes? All the women here are wearing skirts. Come, let's introduce ourselves. I am the leader, Yoonhyuk-soo. As you know from the forum, my occupation is a garter. You don't have to worry about getting aggro on you. Nice to meet you." Yoonhyuk-soo turned his head to look at another member. The man sitting on the right side, who had been smiling from the beginning, then talked. "I am Kim In-pil. My job deals with command magic. I can control the body of kobolds or goblins." "Wah, there are also jobs like this?" Everyone looked at Kim In-pil with surprise. I didn't see anything about a command magician on the Awakened website. It is because my day job before this was an undertaker. An undertaker was in charge of funeral homes. In some cases, their job would cause special conditions when awakening, but a command magician was certainly a rare occupation. The command magic could control dead bodies. I wasn't remotely interested in it. I immediately checked Kim and Pill's status window. Name Kim and Pill Occupation Hero Command Magician. Title Person who deals with corpses. XN Magic Power +2. Stats Strength 16, Intelligence 14, Agility 13, Stamina 14, Magic Power 45, Potential 121 275, Uniqueness none. Skill Body Control N. Uneven abilities. His physical abilities and intelligence was the worst, but magic was very high. Having high magic power wasn't always good. All fights required stamina. They would collapse after using one or two of his strongest spells, so it was better to have it even instead of one stat too high. I was somewhat unfamiliar with command magicians. I had seen specific professions like shamans or animal guardians, but this was the first time I saw a command magician that dealt with corpses. It was close to the ability of a demon. In fact, there were many creatures and demons with that ability. Of course, the skill was quite poor. At best, only a few kobolds and goblins could be moved. Title. There was only one thing to praise. Title. Decrease. Kim Suwon hadn't rested until he was able to buy the Iron Man car, an experienced dungeon hero, so they couldn't help but feel envious. Omo, the car is really good. One of the females approached and admired it. Haha, thank you. Kim Suwon laughed straightforwardly. Your skill are really good. I've been on quite a few raids. We should go together sometimes. The two of us hunting? I will teach you the methods to get rid of the creatures. Where did you borrow this from? I received it as a gift. The Bugatti Veyron as a gift? Everybody stared with incredulous eyes. Even if he had attacked dungeons for 8 months, it was impossible to obey the Bugatti Veyron. In other words, he was quite rich. They were puzzled about why a rich person would turn to the dungeons, but there was no further explanation. Everybody was overwhelmed by the sight and didn't ask any questions. And after a while, the beautiful woman admiring the car, the water magician Li Jihai entered my car. The men who were secretly eyeing her looked like a fisherman who had lost a big catch. Anyway, can you see the building in front of the dungeon? It is a shop run by the Mithril Guild. Weapons and armor that stop the basic attacks from the monsters can be found there. A 2-story building had been constructed. It was 500 meters away from the dungeon. If a real monster wave occurred, then it would be the first place hit. The business was very big and contained lots of merchandise. Yoon Hyuk-soo went up to the armor and weapons displayed in the shop. I thought for a bit before renting an iron sword. It was a pretty good weapon. I put it on the counter where a man with glasses said, "Is this your first time?" "It is my first time. This is charged by hour. A deposit of 300,000 won will be received." I obediently took out the money from my wallet. "Can you prove your identity?" "Here." I showed the identification. He gave the sword back after verifying it. The salesman was tougher than I thought. After renting the necessary things, the 8 people stood at the entrance of the building. Yoon Hyuk-soo looked at me from the bottom up. "Randolph Nim? Will you be fine getting dirty with blood?" I only rented a sword. I was still wearing the suit. The women wearing skirts had already changed into comfortable outfits, thin padded clothes with body armor, but I shook my head. We wouldn't be spending a long time in the dungeon, so it was troublesome to change. I replied curtly. "I'm okay." Just this once?" Yoon Hyuk-soo didn't really care. This was often the case with beginners. They would change their minds after experiencing the dungeon. Yoon Hyuk-soo handed out lights the size of a fist to all the crew members. "This will light up for 48 hours without charging. Be careful not to lose it because it is precious inside the dark dungeon. Then let's go." The entrance to the dungeon was 500 meters away from the building. It was close enough to be seen with the naked eye. Yoon Hyuk-soo spoke as the 8 people arrived at the entrance. "Do you remember your positions from the briefing? I will take aggro, the close combat professions in front." Each of them were given a position because on their occupation and abilities. It was more optimized compared to walking around randomly. Soon the entire raid group entered the dungeon. From now on, don't relax. We don't know where they will come from. Today, we won't enter deep and will just wander around near here. Everyone was nervous as they looked around. They were a raid group that had just been hastily constructed today. Time was needed to practice. It would be difficult to enter deeply to fight the creatures. The square light shone brightly like a lamp rather than candlelight. It was bright enough for them to check the surroundings, but it couldn't be too bright because the creatures were likely to gather. The beginners should stick together, Hung, Park Hoon-taek said as he walked next to me. I nodded lightly in response. The young man had a timid appearance as his eyes seemed scared. Hyung, aren't you afraid? It isn't scary. It really looks like it. I'm scared to die. I heard the kobolds are ugly and frightening. The first hunt was successful. How was it? Can you do it? Yoon Hyuk-soo asked as he swept the sweat from his forehead. You handle aggro really well. I've participated in a few raids, so it is really noticeable, Kim Soo-won said as he gave a thumbs up. The aggro hadn't switched during the hunt. Yoon Hyuk-soo quickly turned his head away. This level of maintaining aggro wasn't enough to be called a genius. Yoon Hyuk-soo stood next to the corpse of a goblin and opened it with a sword. The heart was the size of a small pebble. Core. The size is okay. We will pick it up. It was a good start. The core from the other goblin was larger than average. Yoon Hyuk-soo recovered the 2 cores with glee before clapping his hands like he remembered something. Ah, that's right. Are the beginners okay? I am fine. Park Yoon-taek stuttered. The dagger moved and gave a few direct blows. But it wasn't enough to be called a good performance. This was his first hunt, so he wanted to impress the group. I just shrugged my shoulders instead of answering. It felt strange attacking my dungeon, but it wasn't bad. This level of hunting was enough to let me know the general principles. There are still quite a few beginners. The raid group will die if they encounter the wrong opponent. Those with high potential could die when they were still beginners in the dungeon. But I inwardly shook my head. I can't lower the difficulty of the dungeon anymore. This section will be left alone. If a human with high potential dies to a goblin or kobold, then they aren't worth it. It was low enough. If I lowered it any more, then it would turn into pulp. No, it was hard to find any creatures lower than the goblins and kobolds. In this way, I participated in the raid, so I needed to look at it from the perspective of the raid members. The weak warriors who made it through a crisis would be helpful. Besides, it reminded me of when I was thrown on the battlefield. If they didn't an effort, then they would die under the pressure. I felt like that. Huiyu, it is going smoothly. Yoon Hyuk-soo smiled pleasantly after defeating a few creatures. It had been 2 hours since entering the dungeon, and they had already collected 13 cores. Each person had already earned more than 1,000,000 won. There were smiles of all of the members' faces. The dead goblins moved slowly behind the party like zombies. This was the command magic of Kim In-pil. The way that they are moving, I looked at it curiously. At that time, Yoon Hyuk-soo said, "Wait a moment." They had been marching for 2 hours. It was time for a break. But there was no place to relax. They needed a place where they could notice the creatures approaching. But it was hard to find such places. Only experienced heroes would know such places. And there were people with a lot of experience in this raid group. The captain Yoon Hyuk-soo saw such a location. They could relax here in peace. The raid crew sat around and took a break. Haven't we gone in too deep? One of the women asked, and Yoon Hyuk-soo shook his head. Do you think we've walked far? In fact, it wasn't that much. If we walk for 30 minutes, then we can exit. Really? We've been circling around. Why? Are you afraid? That, the woman smiled awkwardly. Don't worry. Look at this. Yoon Hyuk-soo opened a leather pouch and his eyes shone as he looked at the cores. 13. Hoo. The size of each one means we can each get at least 200. Shouldn't Captain Nim receive more? The octahedral-shaped core would sell for 1.5 times more than the others. The captain was the one responsible for holding most of the aggro. Furthermore, he was in charge of all the preparations. Everybody recognized that he was exposed to the most risks. I have enough. Oh my God. The women were all excited, hunting for 2 hours and receiving 200. This seldom ever happened. Luck was also a skill. Should we continue for a little more? Our breathing is fine. Can't we hunt up to 5 creatures without any difficulty? Yoon Hyuk-soo made a suggestion. It was a waste to stop here. They had already earned this much just on the first day. Suffering for a few hours could earn enough for a month. It was dangerous, but they were shaking with excitement at the thought of money. It was necessary to invest time. Okay, let's go. Everyone expressed their approval. I also had no reason to refuse. I nodded, and the raid group rested for 10 more minutes before beginning to move. It had been 4 hours since they entered the dungeon. A significant number of creatures had been eliminated on this raid. Shall we go back now? I don't want to go any more than this, Kim Suwan said uneasily. There was definitely a sense that they had entered too deeply. In addition, everyone was exhausted. They also needed to get rid of any creatures discovered on the way back. Yoon-hyuk-soo didn't refuse. Instead, he had a condition. Then I'll go forward and check one last time. How about it? Well, it is okay if it is the last time. We'll wait for you. Lure them properly. Yoon-hyuk-soo left with an easygoing smile while holding his shield. The raid group waited for Yoon-hyuk-soo like the previous times. However, time passed and Yoon-hyuk-soo didn't return. It had been 5 minutes. There was still no news. 10 minutes passed and they were all filled with anxiety. Why hasn't he come back yet? What do you think happened? The females were the first ones to react with anxiety. Kim Suwan sighed. I will wait another 10 minutes. If he doesn't come back, then we will return on our own. Are we going to abandon Captain Nim? Kim In-pil, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke. The command magician that had always been in the back suddenly came to the front. Captain Nim, 10 minutes have passed, but please wait another 10 minutes. Wasn't it posted on the website? Sometimes a chaser won't return for at least 15 minutes. A chaser has to wait, excite the creatures without being killed. It was possible to excite the creatures, but the smell of blood might lure even more. It was better to avoid such places. How can a person be so cruel? Be quiet or die. Kim Suwan was a veteran. He had gone through this experience a few times. It was useless if they ended up dying as well. Time passed quickly. Everyone held their breaths as they waited for Yoon-hyuk-soo to return. And 10 minutes passed. Let's go. Just a little bit more. Wait a little longer. Please. Kim In-pil tried, but public opinion was already on Kim Suwan's side. Kim Suwan refused coldly and turned his body away. I've waited a lot already. 10 minutes. No, 5 more minutes? Do you really like him? Kim In-pil bowed deeply. This is a request. He has been my friend for 10 years. My parents died when I was young, and he is the only one I have left. I can't possibly abandon him. His eyes shone with tears. Can't we wait 5 more minutes? This matter is pitiful. GC, I understand. 5 more minutes. After that, we will go without any regrets. Do you understand? Kim Suwan had already become the leader of the group. He was the most experienced one here. The other group members obediently followed Kim Suwan's opinion. Thank you very much. Kim In-pil bowed his head several times. The group members were tired as they waited for Yoon-hyuk-soo. A person couldn't constantly maintain a tense state. Being tense consumed more energy than necessary. They became physically and mentally exhausted. The situation was like that now. They had been in a tense state for 4 hours and 20 minutes. Now it was difficult for them to even brandish a sword or fire arrows. When 5 minutes passed again, something is coming. Kim Suwan was the first one to notice the abnormality. He leaned forward in the direction the sound was coming from. Then his expression changed. It crumpled. Crazy. He took one step back and cursed. Everybody was puzzled, but I could soon see why. Kuruk! Kiririk! Yoon-hyuk-soo was coming. He was followed by numerous creatures. Run! Where? The only ones who knew the geography of this place was Yoon-hyuk-soo and Kim Suwan. But Yoon-hyuk-soo was being chased, while Kim Suwan was in a blank state. Then Kim In-pil ran towards Yoon-hyuk-soo, along with the corpses of the creatures killed during the raid. What should they do? The speed of the creatures wasn't that unusual. It was just impossible to escape when they were completely exhausted. Kim Suwan looked back. 3 girls, 2 beginners. The situation right now. How could they escape the dungeon while being pursued by creatures? A pessimistic situation. The creatures were all excited. They would catch up persistently. On the other hand, Yoon Hyuk-soo and Kim In-pil were veterans. Survival was their only goal. There was no need look any further. Kim Soo-won abandoned the 5 people. He immediately ran towards Yoon Hyuk-soo and Kim In-pil. Wait a minute, one of the 2 beginners. The thief, Park Hyun-taek, was surprised, but it was already too late. The women also looked devastated. This situation is fun, my mouth twisted. Weak humans were being culled. It was no different from the demon world. They didn't linger and coldly turned their backs. The conclusion of this would be a little interesting. Would they give up? This wasn't a play. It was the crossroads of survival. As a dungeon master, I saw a variety of situations, but this one felt different. It had a faint scent of nostalgia. Run away. I'll buy some time. A beginner. A thief. Every time I talked to him, he seemed like an innocent youth. Park Hyun-taek grasped his dagger with trembling hands. I was impressed. Sacrifice. The 5 people couldn't even think about fighting. There was only a 1% chance. I didn't expect a sacrifice at all. It was natural. They had met for the first time today. It hadn't even been half a day since they met. Then to die for them, it was too unexpected. He gripped his fists tightly. A noble sacrifice? That was just a word for death. In other words, he was going to his death. Go now. I'm sorry. Be careful. Huck! The 3 women turned away at Park Hyun-taek's cry. They started to run back the way they came. The women knew. They left him here to die. I gave one last smile to Park Hyun-taek before following. I could easily organize the situation now. But I didn't. I didn't feel the need. After all, they were intruders. They invaded my home without any authorization. Kim Young-woo had value, but Park Hyun-taek was different. He had low potential and low growth, so he wouldn't be any help to me. Well, it would be different if he did whatever it took to survive. Park Hyun-taek moved with extreme sadness, but there was no chance. It was a short path, and the creatures soon reached him. Park Hyun-taek had inflicted attacks on creatures today, but it was only one at a time. His attacks were easily blocked, and the result was obvious. Quack. Quaduduk. Quack. The 3 women with tears, runny noses, and messy hair slumped down. They were half exhausted and could barely sustain their bodies. One of the girls sat down and buried her face in her knees. Another one was holding her chest while breathing roughly. The remaining female continued looking around. They had squeezed themselves to the limit in order to escape the swamp of death. Their legs couldn't run anymore. There was no conversation. They couldn't even afford to talk. If only time could stop. No, if they could go back to the past. The rest of the people, what happened to them? Lee Ji-hye broke the silence. A magician had high intelligence, so she could calmly look at the situation. The other 2 women didn't answer. Everyone knew there would be a pessimistic answer if they opened their mouths, particularly regarding Kim Soo-won and Kim In-pil. The 2 men had abandoned them. Perhaps? Does anyone know where we are? Naturally, no one lifted their hands. The women didn't have a lot of experience with dungeons. They never thought about memorizing the terrain of the dungeon during the raid. Lee Ji-hye looked closely at the faces of the remaining people. She just turned away from me. This was because she knew that I was a beginner to the dungeon. Of course, I actually knew the terrain of the dungeon, but I didn't raise a hand. My thoughts were the same as it was regarding Park Hyun-taek's situation. I would watch the situation and welcome any catastrophe. No, Lee Ji-hye sighed. The area was dark. Apart from me, the others had all thrown away their lamps. They would turn off in the next few hours anyway. A plan. Let's focus on a plan. What plan? We're all going to die. I'm going to die. One woman was hysterical. Lee Ji-hye was silent. She didn't say anything as the woman hysterically shouted at Lee Ji-hye. You're the one who said to wait 5 more minutes. If you didn't, we would be out of the dungeon by now. Everything is your fault. So? What? The woman glared angrily. Whether she believed it or not, Lee Ji-hye played dumb and had a brazen look on his face. It is already in the past. Or do you want to kill me? Shameless. If you don't want to kill me, then we should discuss what to do next so that we don't die. My head was busy as I watched Lee Ji-hye acting coolly. I was remembering her potential, but the sight now couldn't be explained by mere potential or stats. Or was I mistaken? I took a deep breath and used mind's eye again. Name? Occupation hero. Title, none stats. Strength 22, intelligence 41, agility 18, stamina 26, magic power 35, potential 142 to 77. Uniqueness, none. Skill, water sphere. I knew it. I wasn't mistaken. So what was her nature right now? She was acting cool and decisive. When we were all together, she had acted like a fish out of water. This person was suitable to be a manager. A person who managed and gave external support from outside during raids. My eyes sparkled. Good. I found an unexpected treasure. I thought I came here in vain but couldn't confirm that the clam actually held a pearl. I decided to keep an eye on her a little more. First, let's re-examine the path we came from. Could you please lend me a light? I silently handed her the light. She placed it down and used a rock to scratch the floor. The rock made a white line that showed the path they took. Rumbe. But this didn't continue. This was due to the fact that they were running away. No matter how good her memory was, she would eventually get blocked at some point. I can only remember up to here. Do you remember? The remaining two women were overwhelmed by Li Jihai. Li Jihai frowned and stared at the ground. Well, I think we can't use this path. Those creatures now have the taste of human flesh. They might still be alive, you know. Who? The three who abandoned us to run away, or Parkentek C, who blocked the creatures. Parkentek C might be alive. It was simply wishful thinking. All of them had heard Parkentek's screams. There was no possibility he was still alive. Only one. We don't know the way back, even if he is still alive. We could also meet the creatures. I don't want to go back that way. Li Jihei was adamant. The woman who talked before finally asked, "Then what is that thing on the ground?" "A map. We need to understand the geography of the area nearby before we start moving. It would be nice if there was pen and paper, but I need to use the ground." "A map. We need to understand the geography of the area nearby before we start moving. It would be nice if there was pen and paper, but I need to use the ground." She explained her private intentions. "I'm perfectly aware of the terrain near the entrance of the dungeon. If a similar terrain appears, what if we end up going deeper?" I had been watching in silence, but now I asked a question. It was more likely to enter the depths of the dungeon rather than the entrance. Li Jihai carefully explained. "There is a creature called the meat bat. Sometimes we would see it flying. The meat bats actually had the highest population in the dungeon. They mainly ate the bodies of goblins and kobolds. They would only attack humans when they were really hungry, or when their territory was invaded. Yes. The meat bats tend to sleep off large meals in the morning and gravitates towards the entrance in the evening. They have such a habit. The area was safe. They returned to their original position to create some safety measures. The first thing was that the surrounding spaces were narrow, so they could create traps to notice the creatures. They dug at the ground and placed arrows before loosely covering them with grass, turning them into traps. They were able to relax now, and the next day, they filled their hunger with some snacks and drank water before moving. Their movements were as careful as possible in order to avoid the creatures. The problem was that the geography of the place was completely unfamiliar. They looked closely for a colony of meat bats. Following a colony of meat bats was required in order to escape the dungeon. The eyes of the remaining woman shone. It was just like what happened to Parkin Take. Li Jihai wasn't the only one who abandoned him. Everyone here was an accomplice. It was obvious he knew he would die. There was always a possibility that others would be abandoned. Li Jihai knew this fact as well, but she shook her head. "That's not what I meant. Anyway, it seems like a fever. Let's look at the situation. I will take Randolph Nim with me to gather food." Roles were assigned. I would go with Li Jihai to gather things like wild mushrooms and grass, but it was unknown if it would lower the fever. Naturally, it depended on the other person's stamina. I'm glad they're not dead yet. Phew. Yet, the nuances were grave. This dungeon is too large. It isn't a space where people can endure. One step, kobolds, goblins, meat bats. I endured it alone. Let's combine forces to resolve this. Wait. Suwan-si. Stop. What's wrong? I told you something before entering the dungeon. After escaping the dungeon, you would introduce me to your sister in the hospital. Kim Suwan nodded like it was natural. Yes, I remember. Will you keep your promise? Haha, don't worry. I promise to honor it. Water sphere. Water flowed around Lee Jihai. Kim Suan was baffled. Why? The promise you made wasn't with your little sister. It was your little brother. Ah, I must have lost my spirit. I've spent too much time alone in the dungeon. Lee Jihai retreated with dismay. She briefly had a chance to talk to Kim Suwan before the dungeon. At that time, Kim Suwan had offered to drive Lee Jihai. He said he would introduce her to his little brother. But who would forget the gender? It wasn't a trivial fact. Lee Jihai made a decision. Don't come any closer. If you take one more step, then I will attack. Tsk. You noticed quickly. Kim Suwan's posture changed dramatically. He placed a sword to Lee Jihai's neck. The water sphere impacted with Kim Suwan's abdomen, but he didn't stop. It was like he didn't feel any pain. The tone, the atmosphere was strange. That's why beginners were accepted, and they were softly coaxed deeper into the dungeon, forcefully marching them without a break and then dispersing them with the attack from a large number of creatures, consistent from start to finish. So I was convinced that Kim In-pil was coming. He built this plan just to monopolize the cores. His bloodthirst was obvious. I, too, was definitely placed in the category of prey. So I waited obediently. Approaching me with impure intentions was a sin I could never forgive. I originally decided to remove his head straight away, but decided to wait when Lee Jihai got involved. Thanks to that, I had some fun watching. It was enough compensation for waiting a few days. Did you know from the beginning? Kim In-pil was puzzled by my dark smile. I could smell the stench of a corpse. I shrugged. It wasn't just the smell, the stiff facial expression and strange voice pitch. In addition, there were lots of evidence. Lee Jihai was normal and had figured out that Kim Suwan was a corpse. A great mentality. Your ability to distinguish things is beyond normal. Kim In-pil had a truly surprised expression. It was normal for people to go crazy after being isolated in a cave filled with creatures for days. I was abnormal by human standards. The standards of humans. Why did this? Lee Jihai opened her mouth after recovering. Her voice was filled with dismay and perplexity. Kim In-pil spread his arms out wide. A dungeon is a really nice place. Dead people are just buried here. Even the body doesn't leave. It is a place where murder is authorized. On the website that gathered the awakened, the killers stated in the notice were Kim In-pil and Yoon Hyuk-soo. Lee Jihai snorted. You are crazy. You made a plan like this just to murder us? Not only murder. He pulled out an old-fashioned notebook. I keep a diary, records of skill proficiencies and different magic. This diary was also from before I awakened. Each awakened had a weapon to fit them. The diary was filled with Kim In-pil's madness. In a sense, it was a weapon that fit him. Make a choice. One of them will die and one will live. Pick the one that dies, and what will happen to the one that lives? Randolph Nim, what does that mean? Choose. Lee Jihai realized that the atmosphere was unusual. She could feel that I had changed since earlier. She clearly saw Kim Suwan's head being cut off, and now she was holding the cards. A last frantic attempt. Lee Jihai spoke like she was squeezing something out. Kill one of them, very brutally. Leave one of them alive. We still need to leave the dungeon. Who lives and who dies? Who lives and who dies? I don't know. Just leave one of them alive. Okay, kill Kim In-pil. Yoon Hyuk-soo. I will try to save him. I'm asking you, please. I gave a small laugh, asking for such a simple favor. The listening Kim In-pil and Yoon Hyuk-soo found out conversation funny. Bravo, you are really a masterpiece. The best. Kim In-pil trembled. Kim In-pil abandoned the honorifics and smiled. I will take the Bugatti Veyron. That car is too good to pass up. Ah, but you should do your best, so that it becomes more fun. Chwarak. In the blink of an eye, Kim Suwan's body standing in front of him was cut in half, and I arrived before Kim In-pil. First, I will cut out your tongue. Chuhuk, a sword was stuck in Kim In-pil's mouth. Kum! Is it fun to pull out the eyeballs of living people? Thanks to the bonus stats from the title, I had 78 points in strength. A human being with that type of strength couldn't be imagined. I dug my fingers into Kim In-pil's eyes while he was still living. Kyuk! Froth flowed from his mouth as Kim In-pil passed out from the pain. A sight that could cause madness. Yoon-hyuk-soo, who was familiar with murder, was unable to move. I even dug out the remaining eyeball before saying dully, "This isn't fun," although I'm not in a very good mood. Kim In-pil writhed in pain. He had told Lee Jae-hai that his hobby was torturing the person before brutally killing them. Now Kim In-pil was dying painfully slowly, or he might even be eaten alive by the creatures. I beheaded Kim Soo-won again while the command magician Kim In-pil had lost his concentration. I wiped the blood on Kim In-pil's clothes and grabbed his diary. I looked at it with mind's eye and realized that Kim In-pil's diary was a very good item. I put the diary away and turned my head. Now it was time to handle the rest of the people. Chang! Yoon-hyuk-soo's sword dropped as soon as my gaze fell on him. He raised both hands. Spare me. This boring fellow. This guy was boring compared to Kim In-pil. I completely lost interest. I pulled my sword from Kim In-pil's mouth and stabbed Yoon-hyuk-soo, dealing damage to his internal organs. Yoon-hyuk-soo grabbed that part of his body and moaned, "Ooh." Soon Yoon-hyuk-soo looked up at me with lovely, resentful eyes. His eyes were asking why I attacked when he surrendered. A human wouldn't know this, but demons were infinitely selfish and would constantly change the laws. Even if he was a murderer, he considered his own life precious. I gazed into Yoon-hyuk-soo's eyes, and he quickly lowered his eyes. I spoke in a low voice. Be a guide. Although you will probably die from excessive bleeding, you can live for an extra hour if the sword isn't pulled out.